Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kavitha Cardoza, Public Editor at the Education Writers Association and moderator of today's webinar, You've Been Laid Off, Now What? Thanks so much for joining us. A few housekeeping details. We have 4 panelists. Each one will speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll take questions for about 10. At the end of each 15-minute block, we'll move on to the next speaker. Please type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel if you have them. We'll also be taping this for our website, ewa.org, and our podcast, EWA Radio. Okay, so there are a few reasons we wanted to put together this webinar. One, I kept seeing tweets about the Gannett layoffs. And when I spoke to Katie Cockle, who was helping coordinate support, she said one of the most common requests from journalists was for professional advice. And I thought EWA can definitely help with that. The second reason is that layoffs in journalism are depressingly common. It's almost inevitable now. If you work in media, at some point in your career, you'll be laid off. So we wanted to share information to help journalists be prepared. And the third reason is personal. A few years ago, I was laid off. And there really is no way to describe that feeling of aloneness. After years of being told my media outlet was like a family, suddenly the message was, here's 1 month severance, you're on your own. You lose your community. I didn't get a chance to say bye to colleagues I cared about. And of course, you start worrying about money and the future. So I'm hoping that today's webinar can provide reporters with practical, actionable tools and help reframe a layoff as an opportunity to take stock of the future. So with that, I'm delighted to welcome our speakers. They're brilliant and accomplished and have lots of information to share. They've graciously allowed us to share their contact information and some resources that we'll put in the chat as they speak. We want this to be very interactive. So if you have resources or tips, or you know of outlets that welcome freelancers, please put all that information in the chat as well. We aren't going to talk about the financial aspects of being laid off, unemployment, severance, and all that, even though that's super important. But we are going to share a great interview with Michael Singletary that we'll put in the chat that talks about how to size up your situation. She talks about looking at saving, severance, what you can sell, as well as investments, and what to do if you have any debt. So the article is from 2009, but it's still very relevant. Our first speaker today is Kathy Liu. She's a lead trainer on diversity, inclusion, and leadership programs at the Poynter Institute. She's also the founder of a consulting business, Audience Ability. With 2 decades of experience, Kathy is going to talk about messaging and networking after you're laid off.
Thank you so much, Kavitha. Thank you, EWA, for having me here with this esteemed panel. It's really awesome, and I'm totally honored. Okay, so looks like I need share screen privileges. Perhaps. Here we go. Thank you. Okay. Can everybody see that slide? Okay, it should say life update, now what? Yes? Okay, great. So I am here to talk about how I announce my news on social media. And but before we start, I'm going to go ahead and reintroduce myself. Hi, my name is Kathy Liu, and I was laid off from the Kansas City Star in 2019. It has been almost 3 years since that happened, and it still feels really horrible to say. And I know, Kavitha was just saying the same thing. Like, how could it have happened to me? And it still hurts a little bit. And I want you to all know that if this has happened to you, that's completely valid. All your feelings are valid. And I never thought it would happen to me. In the story that I wrote for Poynter about my experience, I start with, like, it feels like the worst breakup ever, because the excuse is, it's not you, it's me. And that is really my takeaway from the experience. It was what happened on paper made complete sense. It also was completely out of my control. So where was it that I could take control? after it happened, right? Where was it like I feel like I got control back? And for me, part of that was really announcing, well, how I would announce the news on my social media networks. So I'm not like a super social media user. I have a decent amount of followers, but I know that at least in journalism, Twitter is a huge place for networking and for journalists to connect. And I also kind of wanted to get the news out for several reasons that I'll discuss here. So I started with this photo, which I took after I found out that I was going to get laid off. So yeah, I planned this selfie because I knew I was going to make the announcement, but I didn't know when yet. I just knew I needed a photo. So planning, don't forget that. So here's what I ended up doing on Twitter. And just a quick recap of what happened. I had about 2 weeks notice from the time I found out I was going to be laid off till my last day. So my last day was actually 11/1, November 1st, but I kind of found out 2 weeks before that. If you see here, I didn't make this post until about a week after my last day at work. And part of that is because I just wasn't ready. Like I wasn't ready the day after, I wasn't ready like 3 days after. It's like I knew I was going to do it, but I didn't feel prepared to do it. I also wanted to think about, kind of pre-edit myself, like what is it that I wanted to share? How did I want to make this announcement? And I decided to stay positive about it. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it sucked. But like for my news to go out, like I wanted to have a positive tone and just kind of reminisce about the great people and the great times that I had at the Star. And that's a lot because that's who I am. That's kind of my style. But I also kind of highly believe in that positivity attracts positivity, right? So I really wanted more of that in my life. Also, my little tidbit of news here, you'll see that you'll find me in KC. So for networking wise, people knew I was going to stay in Kansas City. So that was just kind of a little clue of like, if you want to reach me, this is where I'm going to be. I'm not necessarily going to move or be looking around for jobs. I used a lot of the same photos on Instagram where I have much fewer followers. But I wanted to do this because I wanted to share with like my personal and professional network what was happening. I did it on Facebook as well, where it's actually I locked down my Facebook, so it's more for friends and family. But the surprise for me here was LinkedIn. I had a LinkedIn account for years and did nothing with it, like really nothing. And I had probably, close to 900 connections, and I probably only knew maybe 50% of them, if even that much. But by the time this happened to me, I realized I had read that LinkedIn had become a more engaged place, that it was a good place for professionals to network. And though I had never used it before, this was a professional event. This was a career update. So I went ahead and posted something on there as well. I can't find my original post, but after I posted it, I was shocked to find that like my post had 2,700 views, which I don't know much about the LinkedIn algorithm, but for somebody who did not know anything on LinkedIn, it seemed like groundbreaking, earth-shattering to me. Like, wow, that's crazy. So I ended up writing the story that I'm referring to, and that you'll have a link to in a handout that Kavitha will share. So I wrote a story just about what I learned from my experiences sharing this on social media. And that is what I'm here today to talk about. First, I want you to realize that talking about yourself is not bragging. Like as journalists, it is something we're not accustomed to doing, that we're not taught to talk about ourselves. But when you're sharing this news about your career and highlighting the things that you're really proud of and focusing on the skills that you have built, that is actually not bragging. It's recognizing your value, which is going to be super helpful to you in the next move in your career. It is also about, for me, staying connected to a network. This happened to me. I've lost my current world that I was working in. But you haven't really lost your network, like all the people who follows you, or all the people who enjoy your product, what you produce. So you want to stay connected to them because you don't know what's next, right? So that's why it's also good to think about it as it's laying a path for what's next. And it's completely okay if you have no idea what that is. In fact, being more open to the possibilities may be even better. But you want to kind of start putting the bricks down for, okay, like I'm going to invite in what's next. I may not know what that is yet, but this update, this post is like one of my first steps toward figuring that out. And other things to keep in mind when you do this. I mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to stay positive to attract positive. Yes, I was angry, but that didn't really come across in any of my posts. Now, I have seen people post this is my last day, and then come back like months after leaving that organization, their concerns about their job or their concerns about the organization. And I think that's completely fair. And so it's up to you how much you want to say. And also remember, like, this won't be the only time you get to say things, right? You want to do it when you're ready, even if it is months away from your last day. So you saw that I waited, about a week to do it because I just wasn't ready. I wasn't mentally prepared for how it would feel. And it's okay if you want to wait months. Like, you don't have to do it within a week even. The key there is to remember, like, okay, just to settle in with yourself, like, am I ready to do this? Because you need to be prepared for all the feelings to hit again, right? Like at the top of this, I was like, oh, it still feels awful to say I was laid off. That's gonna stick with you. So be ready to feel all those feelings again. And you wanna decide how you're going to engage. When you post this on all the places, people will comment, people will have things to share, people will want to engage with you. So that is going to take an effort. That's going to take mental effort, personal effort, time. And so you want to make sure that when you do this, that you have a plan for how you're going to engage with those comments. In retrospect, like I just went and hit like on a lot of the comments that I got, but I kind of wish I may have commented more personally on a lot of those that I got. And remember, when you do this, you want to update your bios as well. So update the bio on all of your social media places. And finally, I just want you to remember that your job is part of your identity, but it is not all of it. Losing your job doesn't mean you've lost all the parts that make you a great and wonderful journalist. Remember that you get to keep your greatness forever. And this is something that I had to really teach myself too in those months and days afterward. Like, this wasn't about me. Like, what made me good at my job, I get to keep forever. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I love that line. I'm going to put it on a little sticky note. You get to keep your greatness forever.
Right.
Kathy, I have a few questions. So when I was laid off, everyone told me, don't put it on social media, like, don't tell anyone about this. How has that thinking kind of changed? And do you think that's a good thing?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's this, if I've heard that necessarily, don't put it on social media. For me, it's whether or not, like, I wouldn't put it on social media if you don't already engage in that space. So I wouldn't feel like if you don't have a Twitter account or you do very little on it, and do I need to put this out on Twitter? Like, I would actually not start doing something to share the news if it isn't something that you're already comfortable engaging in, or that people, like, there are people there for you. Also, you don't have to do it on all the social media channels. Like, you could just choose one. You could just choose one to share the news in, the one that you're most active in. I have found that for me, it was actually almost like a form of therapy to post it. It helped me talk about my situation. It also was like super heartening to see people I didn't even really work with closely to say, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, I really enjoyed working with you. Like, hearing that was really, really great. Like, I wasn't prepared, actually, partly, for all the response I would get, that positivity. So in that vein, I would say, like, it may surprise you, to put it out there and to hear, like, to get feedback from people, and some of you who may be strangers, but still, it just kind of makes you feel connected, even though you've just lost like a huge connection, but it helps you feel connected to others.
Right. It's it can be very affirming.
Yes, good word.
I also wanted to say, like, don't forget, you were talking, Kathy, about your network. You haven't lost your network, even though you've lost your job. And journalists are great at editing. So if you need help with someone reading your resume or someone to do a mock interview with you, lean on your former colleagues, because oftentimes I found they're anxious to help. They just don't know how.
Yes, that's a really great point. And I have to add that, I have made connections or network people on LinkedIn through my posts that I never would have met. I haven't met in person yet, but we're now working together. So like you may be surprised at like what you can end up building by doing this.
Also, we do this all the time with sources, right? I mean, we have no problem going on to Twitter or LinkedIn and finding experts or finding people to talk to. This is just getting past that, like, oh, I'm doing it for myself, and putting it out there.
That's right. That's true too.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Our second speaker, Rachel Cohen, is a senior policy reporter at Vox Media. Before that, she had freelanced for a decade with local and national outlets. She's helped organize for better freelance standards with the Freelance Solidarity Project, a division of the National Writers Union. Rachel is going to talk about freelancing and how to take advantage of other opportunities out there like fellowships.
Thank you. And yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to share some insights and definitely want to make myself available after this to anyone who has, if you have questions you don't feel comfortable asking here, feel free to send me an email. So my name is Rachel Cohen. I'm a journalist. Education is one of the areas that I cover, and up until April, I had freelanced for about a decade, including about 5 years of full-time freelancing. And when I say full-time, I mean I derived all of my labor income from freelancing, but I absolutely would not recommend jumping into doing full-time freelancing right away, and I didn't. That said, freelancing is, you absolutely can dive into freelancing right away. There's a lot of opportunity to do it, and as journalists, you all have a lot of skills that position us really well for that. So part of the process, I think, after a layoff will involve thinking, all right, what is my next goal? If your goal is you want to sort of devote most of your energy and time for looking for another staff job, freelancing can be a really great way to stay connected, because, and you don't have to worry about doing a million pieces. You could just focus on doing 1 or 2 pieces that you're interested in, or so that when you get your next interview, you can tell a hiring editor, when they say, what have you been up to over these last few weeks or months, you can kind of say, oh, I've been doing some freelancing, I'm working on this story right now on this topic, as well as juggling some other side gigs to pay the bills. And that's honestly all you would need to say. Everyone would understand that. And that's really just sort of an option if you want to show you're kind of staying involved with journalism. You can just be working on 1 piece. Now, maybe you're at a point in your life where you're saying, I don't actually know if I want to go through the ringer of a job process right now. Maybe I will later, maybe I won't, but I'm kind of curious to see what else is out there for me besides full-time staff journalism jobs. And in that case, freelancing is also a really great option because you don't have to quit journalism cold turkey to explore other things. I think for a long time in our industry, we've had so much black and white thinking about what you need to be doing in all the working hours of a day to be a journalist. But what a lot of freelancers do very happily is they cobble together a mix of journalism and, say, corporate work, or mix of journalism and a steady gig like childcare, or working at a coffee shop, or teaching, or freelance journalism and working on a farm, or maybe you want to do something physical like get your physical training license. Or a really, really common route is doing freelance journalism and some sort of professional communications, like for a nonprofit or social media or speech writing. There are really so many combinations available, and especially since COVID happened, I think it's gotten even easier because a lot more organizations have kind of relaxed about locations. So you're in a really exciting position, I think, to sort of sit with yourself and think, what do I want to do? What kinds of combinations might be interesting? And so, like, to be completely candid, the freelance journalism part, that might be a lower paying part of your cobbling, but it can be one of the most meaningful parts. And so maybe you're saying, okay, I'll work, I can, maybe I'll do this higher paying thing I don't care about for this part of the week, but that will allow me to subsidize the projects I'm really passionate about. And that's just like a really legitimate, beautiful way to structure a working career. So I'm at a staff job now, but I didn't leave freelancing because I didn't want to freelance anymore. I accepted an opportunity that kind of came my way, sort of out of nowhere, but I left a small business that I built and was really proud of. And so the next thing that I just want to kind of say is like, there are trade-offs to both freelancing and being on staff. And I'm sure any of you guys saw this as you worked in your organizations. Like when I was freelancing, I know so many staff reporters who felt so overwhelmed, or they didn't actually like what they were doing on a day-to-day basis. And they didn't feel sort of secure in their jobs. And there were a lot of times when I actually felt like I had more security because I wasn't putting all of my clients in one basket. I could work on building relationships across the industry, kind of have different things if other things fell through. And I'm not alone in feeling this way. These are just some statistics, but like, you know, you tend to hear freelancing is hard. It's not for everyone. It's not at every time in your life, it might not be the right call, but there are lots of ways that you can make it so that you actually feel both more satisfied with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and more secure, because you have, you know, different pots and different, you know, what's the phrase, different pots and different kettles. You know, you kind of have fallback options in a way sometimes staff journalism doesn't. And so that it's honestly, it can feel really good to know that. And so the last couple of things I wanted to offer is just some suggestions of how to get started. These are some places that, you know, offer support to help subsidize bigger, ambitious projects. Now, you might not necessarily be looking to do a big, ambitious project, but, you know, for example, I got a grant from the Fund for Investigative Journalism in 2019, which helped me write a story for the Washington City paper, which is a local outlet I love, but they don't pay so well. But with the combination of a FIDGE grant and city paper, it was able to be, you know, a substantial enough money for me to justify the time. Now, I think what is in terms of just getting started, what I would say freelance journalists kind of have to reorient your mind is, you know, you're a journalist, but you're also kind of a small business. And so I think one of the most impactful things to do, especially after layoff, is just sending an email to an editor and being really candid about, you know, introduce yourself, be really candid about your experience and your experience in journalism, and say, you know, I just wanted to put myself on your radar. I'd love to talk with you about freelance opportunities, or let you know that I'm looking for opportunities over the next couple of months as I figure out my next move. In general, I think that people really do want to help other people, and everyone knows that it takes a village to make this work. And so I think you can start sending out those kind of emails even before you have a pitch idea, just sort of establishing a connection and a relationship with an editor, saying, look, I've covered these topics, I'm also capable of these. You're basically just putting yourself on people's radar to say, like, I can do this service, I'm experienced, what kind of services might you need in the next couple of months? And what I would say is, if they don't answer, you've all worked in newsrooms, you know editors have really busy, stressed out weeks or months. Don't take it personally. You can definitely follow up. If they don't answer, try not to take it personally, because people just, you might be hitting them at a bad month. And it's just gonna, it's like reporting. You know, when you're trying to get sources, you kind of have to cast a wide net. The same is just true for freelancing. And I think, you know, it can be hard, but it can also, it uses much of the same skills as we have to use when we chase down people for a story, and you already have those skills. So you're already like in a really good spot.
Thank you so much, Rachel. What you said about kind of trying to chase down an editor was one of the hardest parts for me, going from a staff job where you're on your editor's radar, you know, you're often the first reporter or whatever to be edited, and then going to a freelance position where you're really like, once everything else in-house is taken care of, then it's the freelancer. And sometimes juggling that was really hard, but it was also, like you said, freelancing can be extremely freeing. I just really loved the time, the flexibility in my schedule. And so freelancing is definitely an option. I wanted to, I'm so glad you mentioned the Education Writers Association Fellowship. We're actually currently giving out micro fellowships of up to $5,000. There's a link in the chat. We encourage anyone, the deadline is tomorrow at 9 Eastern time. So we encourage you, anyone who's an education reporter, or who has an idea about education, please go ahead and apply. There are also affinity groups that often have things about jobs, fellowships. They have job boards, networking. You can ask for a mentor. Different beat organizations also have a lot of these kinds of groups. So I think there's a way to feel connected as a community. Rachel, were you part of a freelance community?
Yes, I was. I mean, both sort of locally, you kind of learn who is freelancing in your cities, and then there are also, for a couple years, I was part of a group called Study Hall XYZ, and I can put that in the chat. But that is sort of an online forum of digital media workers. After a couple years, I joined the Freelance Solidarity Project, which is a division of the National Writers Union. I think what I'm sure maybe people involved in this chat have personally seen is just the circling in. I fully expect that if I want to stay in media, I'm going to be freelance staff, that it's just much more porous than maybe it was in previous decades. And so you end up meeting a lot of freelancers because your friends on staff become freelancers, but then maybe they get jobs, but then they are able to sort of send work your way or refer you to editors. And so in terms of networking, I think it's great to network with other freelancers because other freelancers can be great sources of support. Maybe I get a project that I don't have capacity for, so it's great to be able to tell an editor, hey, I can't do this, but you should absolutely reach out to this person. That person appreciates it. They'll refer you next time. It's really sort of everyone's getting the work done that they need. But then also, you know, freelancing with people on staff or networking with people on staff and editors is like, we're all still in the same industry, even if our current ways we're getting paid for work and our cobbling of how much reporting versus maybe some other kind of work. I absolutely think that, you know, it just helps to like respect how everyone is kind of navigating this time because our industry is unstable, but we're all reporters and we're all just like figuring it out in the various chapters.
Mm-hmm. I love that, seeing it as a porous, you know, a very porous kind of way to go through your career rather than like something which is very rigid. Was it hard for you, Rachel, when you had to go from kind of having the backing of a news organization to kind of almost selling yourself and your skills, or was that a hard process?
Yeah, and I don't like, you know, it's not my favorite thing. I'm sure many people have, I know everyone has very varying degrees of comfort with how they sell themselves and having to do that. It's not, it's definitely not my favorite part of the job. I think the way that I kind of talked myself into it is like, you know, well, everyone who runs a business has to market their services. So I'm marketing my product, and when I do that, other editors will notice, and then they might reach out for their services. And it's just a function of the job you have to do if you want to get clients and clients and pitching. And some of these terms are not terms you use that much as a staff writer, and I know that, and I was a staff writer and I am a staff writer now. But I think it's just helpful to be like, okay, well, now I'm in a freelance role, so I'm still a professional, I'm still a journalist, but how I'm going to get business, which is again not terms we necessarily need to call it as a staff writer, but that's what you're doing. You are doing, and so a lot of my biggest piece of advice for people trying to like do freelancing is, you know, editors are so overwhelmed, they're so stressed out. As much as you can do to help to tell an editor, look, I know what I'm doing, you can trust me, I can make your life a little easier, you can give me this assignment and I'll turn in something on time that's relatively clean, like I'm not going to be another stress on your plate. It is so helpful because they just need lifelines, and you can be that because you're a trained journalist who just worked on staff, you know how this works. And that, I think, is just like, and that's part of the porous thing, like, you know what the editor job is like, and now you're someone who can help out an editor and they can help you out, and then you might have to like promote your work a little bit to get another editor, but that's kind of builds. And it's going to be the hardest in the first year, but something that I also found really satisfying about freelancing is that it actually does get easier over time because you are building your, relationships of people who then trust you to hire you.
Absolutely. So losing your job as a reporter is not the end of the world or even the end of your career. In fact, it can be the beginning of another career. There have been journalists who have transitioned to be doctors, lawyers, diplomats, social workers, you name it. Theola DeBose is a former reporter at the Washington Post. She's also the founder of JSKILLS, a course that offers tools and guidance to people wanting to transition from a newsroom to a new career. Welcome, Theola.
Thank you. I need sharing privileges. While that's happening, I will just tell all 24 of you, welcome. I cannot see you. I cannot see your names, but thank you for being here. And I'm going to get started. All right. Hopefully I'm showing the right window. Wonderful. Okay. I'm going to do that. Okay, great. The first thing I want to say is that we've been talking a lot and there's a lot of information. So sorry, I just want to take a 10-second pause. So just do what you want to do, close your eyes, and I'll just count to 10 or keep them open, but we're just going to pause for 10 seconds. Okay, so I will get started. I am Theola DeBose. Thank you, Kavitha, for that wonderful introduction. I want to make sure that I use all of my time, so I'm going to dive right in. Oh, okay. So I transitioned from journalism about 10 years ago. I've written weather stories, night cops. I know all of the things that goes in with the job. And you've heard us talk about identity. And actually, I will say that we have never heard each other's presentations before today. But what's so beautiful was that so many themes are resonating. So identity, of course, is a huge factor in this. And you may feel like leaving journalism, you're losing your identity. So I always like to think about, a driver's license, which most of us have, and most of us maybe have seen our birth certificate. And the thing is, where does it say journalist on your driver's license? Or your first name on your birth certificate? It doesn't say journalist. And so the journey that you are about to go on to figure out what's next, you will grapple with identity during that journey, guaranteed. But just remember, it does not say these things on your birth certificate. It's not your form of identification. Just like Kathy was saying, it's a piece of yourself. And once you accept that your identity is yours and not the place that you once worked, when you are even thinking about changing careers from journalism, you have already taken the first step, because there can be something different after your name, comma. It can be something totally different. So I have a whole system that I teach about this in the online courses, because like Kavitha mentioned, I was a Washington Post reporter. I actually went on to do a couple of other roles, and then I became a career coach, and then I coach journalists now doing this. But there are 3 tips that I want to share today that are essential for you getting started with anything that we've talked about today, and we meaning the entire panel. So the first one is to let go of the observer identity. As we all know, journalists watch other people. They don't get involved. So what happens when it's time to change careers, either by force or by choice? You have to actually do something, right? Kathy said, I'm going to post on social media. I'm going to do something, right? So you may be thinking, I know I have to do something, but there are so many sneaky ways that this observer identity comes into play. For example, right now on this webinar, I know that I can't see you all, but I don't know if anyone has actually asked a question, if anyone has dropped a question in the chat, right? Why? Because you may be stuck in observer mode, taking notes, listening, but not saying, oh, I want to take action and get this burning question answered about my career, my new career or career change. And of course, you might be thinking, well, I don't want anybody to know, or I'm embarrassed because I just got laid off. All of these absolutely valid reasons, but that's still keeping you stuck in observer mode, right? When you have to take action, it's a little bit scary. I mean, who knows what's going to happen if you press send on that social media post? What's going to happen if you ask a question? You don't know, but you have to let go of being an observer because you can't observe your own career change. You have to actually do it. And then the second tip is to set a goal. There's so much great advice that we've said. There's more advice that's coming. I'm sure you've heard advice before this webinar. You will hear advice after this. You can listen and even take some action on some of this advice and still have nothing to show for it. Why? Because you haven't set a goal. The difference between the journalists who I coach, that I see the ones who actually move forward and make progress, and the ones who just seem to be really stuck, is that they haven't set a goal. Now, what's an example of setting a goal? Well, it has to reflect you and where you are right now. We don't have to get super fancy. You could think, okay, let me set an emotional goal. Like, am I still crying every day? Or can I not even mention my employer without getting super angry? Then maybe a goal is, I'm going to give myself a month to actively manage the emotional fallout, no judgment. So if that means you watch Netflix every day, or you maybe eat a little too much ice cream, maybe you want to watch that for your health, but you're like, hey, I need to deal with this emotionally. I'm going to give myself a month to do that. Or maybe a financial goal and just say, hey, I plan to look at that Michelle Singletary article and deal with my finances in like 2 weeks, right? Or a career goal, or really soft early career goal can be, I plan to land a new role that reflects my values and where I can make a difference. But you have to have a goal, something, because without a goal, you're just doing a bunch of stuff, but then you don't really know why. So make sure that out of this webinar, or at least out of this early experience of being laid off, you're setting some goals for yourself. And then the third tip is to create the future, or what I call really dive into your transferable skills. I have a different word for it that I will tell you about, but this is really key. And for an example, I am going to use our esteemed moderator, Kavitha, who talked about how she got the idea for this panel. Now, she doesn't know it, but she really used all of her amazing skills to make this panel happen. So let me dive into that, because what I teach the students that I have, I call these skills evergreen skills, because essentially they are in every single job everywhere, whether you're the CEO of Airbnb or you work at McDonald's. I mean, every job kind of is the same, right? Show up, do work, go home. Now, the do work part is where it gets kind of different, but there are 4 core evergreen skills that are really in effect. And so I will give you all 4. I save this for my students, but there's 22 of you and you're getting the secret sauce. So these are collaborate, lead, manage, and problem solve. And if we go back to Kavitha creating the future with this panel, she literally created this future moment right now by saying, I have an idea. So I'm going to collaborate. I am going to reach out to speakers and ask them to speak. I'm going to collaborate with my colleagues. And I had to manage information, data, all these different moving pieces, right? I had to problem solve. Theola missed the tech rehearsal. Where is she? Let me call her. Let me text her. What's going on, right? And then she led this entire process, of course, with some help, I'm sure, from her colleagues. I don't know behind the scenes. But Kavitha literally created the future. This moment right now is the future by having this idea and taking action using these skills to do it. So that's what is next for you and what's possible for you. You can actually create the future of your future career and your future self by leaning on your evergreen skills. So just to recap, remember, it doesn't say journalist on your birth certificate, so you're free. You're free to become a player and let go of being that journalist observer. And you'll want to set a goal, and you will keep on setting goals throughout this process. And you want to believe that I can create the future with my already evergreen skills, already meaning the skills that I already have. I already know how to collaborate. I already know how to lead. I already know how to manage. I already know how to problem solve. So I hope that you'll step into action and ask a question. And I do believe there's a link that we'll share in a little bit where how you can find me and sort of catch up with me. But I just want to thank you all so much for showing up and being here and allowing me to share with you.
Thank you so much, Theola. We actually have a comment where someone says, I've been stuck in observer mode for 1 year. Thank you for identifying it.
You're welcome. It's so sneaky. I can tell you what I did. It wasn't about a year, but 9 months about. I just kept talking to people about what I wanted to do. And that's not a bad thing, but it was like I was trying to report my own career change. Like, let me talk to this person. Let me talk to that person. Let me talk to that person. And after 9 months, I had nothing to show for it. So I recognized that, and I like to always say there's a reason why you do certain things. It's not a right or a wrong. And then once you know, then you're aware, and then you have a choice about what sort of change do I want to make.
Mm-hmm. Theola, I'm going to ask you now in 2 minutes, can you give us kind of, like, I guess I'm saying us, like journalists collectively, a pep talk? What are some of those evergreen skills that every journalist has that transfers very easily?
There are so many, and part of the issue with this is that it's not just the skill, but it's also having the story to explain the skill, because journalists manage and chiefs of staff manage, right? Both of them manage, but they manage very different things. So for example, journalists manage a lot of information. What's an example? I read 200 emails a day, or I sift 200 emails a day because I have to figure out what's important, right? Like, that's a real thing that people do. But when it comes to, producing a story, breaking news, winning prizes, like, you're not thinking about how you sift through 200 emails a day. Like, that's just so common. It's just nothing. But it's actually a very valuable and valid evergreen skill that you have, because, for example, there are some private companies and even some government positions where you have to analyze information and quickly produce some, not solutions, but some conclusions about that information, right? So a journalist who was able to sift through so much information and figure out what's most relevant and then present it, it's a highly valuable skill. But it's so easy to overlook that, and you think, oh, I'm not qualified, I just have to go into PR, not knowing that you literally know what's important, and that judgment is very key. So that's just an example. Like, you manage information. Some people manage people depending on their role. You manage your time, right? And that's just managed. We didn't even get to collaborate or the other ones, but there are probably dozens of examples you can come up with for each of these verbs. And all of a sudden you've got like 60 examples. And now you can write the cover letter because you actually know what to say. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. My favorite journalism skill is the ability to go up to strangers, either call them or meet them face to face, and you're not phased. They might be super important, or they might be, regular. It just doesn't matter. That ability to not take it personally. I remember when I was a television reporter, I had to do man on the street, and there's nothing more mortifying than standing outside the metro station saying, Can I ask you about this? Can I ask you about this? And you get 200 no's. And it's just
Yes.
like, yep, just keep going. The next person might say yes.
Yeah. So guess what? That means that you can manage rejection really well. Now, whether you want to do sales or not, it's up to you. But you can say, hey, I can manage rejection, right? That's like one thing. I mean, you could even stretch collaboration and say, I can collaborate with anyone because I can talk to anyone, you know? Quickly, one thing I figured out, because numbers are, sometimes people are like, I don't know what to put on my resume, numbers. I figured out one time that I have interviewed more than 35,000 people in my time as a journalist. Like, I crunched the numbers. I mean, is it perfect? Is someone going to fact check me? You know, we have to let that go. I think it was Rachel talking about black-white thinking. We have to let that go. But I got my job as a career coach for a company, the company that that other companies hire when they want to lay off people. I was the coach for those people. And they wanted all this experience, which I didn't quite have, but I said, I know I can listen to people and coach them because I have been doing that one-on-one. And I put in the cover letter, you know, even though I don't have all this HR experience, I said, I have interviewed 35,000 people, so I have superb listening skills, right? I could say that, and they couldn't deny that, and I got the job. But it's actually knowing that having talked to 35,000 people, that's a J skill, and someone else will want that.
Thank you, Theola.
You're welcome.
Getting laid off can be traumatic. It's definitely very, very stressful. And we don't want to imply that taking care of your mental health is the last step. In fact, nearly all our speakers, or all of them, believed it was the first step. Before you do anything else, you need to make sure you're emotionally ready. Naseem Miller is the senior health editor at the Journalist's Resource, a fantastic website that helps curate and translate academic research for journalists. She's going to talk about mental health and self-care. Welcome, Naseem.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for sticking around. I'm in Florida and it looks like it's about to storm, so if I disappear, I'm sorry. But let's keep our fingers crossed. All right, so I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about taking care of yourself, and because this is a difficult time. And when I was reading some of the articles on being laid off, it is in a journalist experience, and I think in most workplaces, but it's a traumatic experience. So I want you to understand that how you're feeling, as I believe Kathy was mentioning, it's valid. So don't deny yourself those emotions. Don't beat yourself up for feeling the way you're feeling. It's an awful thing. But also what you need to remember is that it is a manageable setback and it's a human experience and you can bounce back from it. So try to think of the bigger picture instead of getting stuck in this moment, as difficult as it is. So I wanted to review quickly some of the signs of trouble that you might be experiencing: extreme amounts of stress, and that is, feeling exhausted, you can't concentrate, you have trouble sleeping, and you're irritable, and also if you're starting to feel apathetic toward things, like you kind of don't care. Those are some of the things that your cup might be running full or empty, however you look at it. So pay attention to your body and the symptoms you're feeling. Don't ignore them. So here are a few tips. You hear a lot about self-care, and they're very simple things. There's no magic self-care solution. It's exercising, eating well, drinking your water, connecting with people. That's very important. And also finding hobbies that bring you joy. They are not necessarily hobbies that you'll be good at. You don't have to be good at. Like, it could be something that you just take pleasure in. Like, I play the piano, but I'm very horrible at it. But still, it's something that takes my mind off of the other things I'm doing. It's not something I'm planning to monetize one day or make a career out of, but it's something that gives me a break from everything else and it makes me happy. So if it's gardening, crocheting, whatever it is, find that thing and let that give you a break from everyday life. The thing about self-care, it's all this simple thing. It's you have to be very intentional about it. Self-care just doesn't happen. So please make time to take care of yourself and give permission to take care of yourself. It's okay. Make time for it the same way we make time for anything else we do in our professional lives. And why you should do that? Because it's a responsible thing to do. As journalists, we're always responsible for deadlines, for turning out stories, getting our facts right. Just consider self-care as part of your own responsibility, because you want to be in a good headspace to, whether it's looking for a job, changing career paths, taking care of your family. Self-care is one of those things that gives you that power to move forward. So consider that in your everyday. One of the things that is recommended, especially right after you're laid off, take a quick break. It's not, you don't need a vacation to Bora Bora unless you can't go to Bora Bora, but really take a break from things and let your body unwind a little bit from the shock you have received, and then jump in. I think Kathy was mentioning she posted her social media post a week after she was laid off. So give yourself a little break and be okay with that. So let's see, establish a routine. I mean, I know it was all quite a change for all of us when we started working from home, and all of a sudden work and personal life blended. So we have gotten a little better than at that, but now that you're on your own, try to establish a routine for yourself. And it's very important because it gives you a sense of control over your time, and also allows you to do things that you want to accomplish, whether it's searching for jobs, pitching stories, exercising, maybe make time for that book you've always wanted to read. Either way, every day, try to, lay out a plan for yourself, just so in that way you can get out of bed, get dressed, and go do whatever it is on your list as your routine. This book, I just finished reading it, and 4,000 weeks, as I learned, is actually the average number of weeks we have on this planet. So it's not a lot, really, when you think about it. So if you get a chance, give it a read. It's not one of those dry time management books, but it takes a more philosophical look at how we approach life and planning and the choices we make. And it puts a lot of things in perspective. So I recommend it. It's good reading. Boundaries are important. I mean, we hear that a lot, but also mark the end of your day if you can, mark the beginning of your day, disconnect from social media. Here's a study, that says doom scrolling is not good for you. So please don't doom scroll, don't spend your time on TikTok, Instagram, going over and over stuff. And next thing you know, an hour of your time is gone. It's not good for your mental health. This is another one, says replacing social media with exercising improves your mental health, which is kind of common sense, but again, somebody has gone out there and studied it. Do things that make you happy. Again, I've talked to some of the reporters who have said, who, cover pretty stressful topics, and they say sometimes they just dance. They stop everything, put on their music and dance. And try to do that intentionally. Get up, put your music and dance, and feel better. To feel better. See a therapist if that's a possibility for you. I know I feel very bad saying this because I know once, especially if you're outside a news organization and health insurance, it can get very expensive to see a therapist. But if you have the opportunity, even for 1 or 2 sessions, consider seeing somebody where you can who can help you unpack how you're feeling, if that's an option for you. And don't kick yourself when you're down. Give yourself some love. This is an article, the link I shared with you, that explains it's not good for your mental and physical health to be hard on yourself. So and everything that the speakers have so far told you is that your identity is not that job. You're so much more than that. So don't be hard on yourself. And that's all I have. Thank you. You're mute. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Naseem. I'm so glad you mentioned doing things that don't cost money. I actually started reading again, going to the library and reading again, because there are so many things people suggest doing. Like they would say, oh, let's meet up for lunch, or let's, and it was like, oh, I don't want to think about all the money that I'm spending. And I remember at the time I got laid off, former President Trump had the public, I think it was called public safety or something, if you were an immigrant and you used public funds for anything. So even though I was, entitled to apply for unemployment, I chose not to because I just didn't want to be caught up if there was a new rule that came in, came in down the road. So having things that don't cost money are wonderful. Is there something, Naseem, about like people can say to themselves about reframing how you see a layoff? Like instead of I was rejected or I'm no longer part of something or I'm so scared, how can you reframe that into something more positive and hopeful?
Yeah, and I think it's in one of the links that is shared with you guys. It was either in a New York Times article or a Harvard Business Review article that, it's really how you look at the situation. And, you can look at it that way, that, you've been rejected, or you can look at it as an opportunity to start something new and something different. And the other thing you can also remember is that you're not alone. Unfortunately, this industry is rife with layoffs. We are always, if you're working, we're worried we're worried that we're going to get laid off, or we have friends who've been laid off, or we get laid off. So you're not alone. So find your community. As I believe Rachel mentioned, the freelance solidarity project, if there are Facebook groups, one of the mitigating factors for this difficult situations is having a good support network to turn to. So talk it out with people you trust and try to get the perspective and understanding, and give yourself permission to feel what you're feeling and move forward. Don't get stuck on the negative.
That is such good advice. There was a question about isolation being the hardest part of being a freelancer and what are the best places to meet other freelancers online. And I think Rachel had some ideas. There are also affinity groups that have things just for freelancers, or online groups that you can check out. Something I started doing after I got laid out was being very purposeful every day about writing down one thing I was grateful for. And I've continued it even after I've started working, but definitely today, I am going to be so, so grateful to the four of you for coming on and spending your time and sharing your expertise with us. I wish I had known you back then. Thank you very much. Kathy Liu, Rachel Cohen, Theola DeBose, and Naseem Miller, and everyone who attended. If you need more help, please feel free to contact me at kcardoza@ewa.org or at Kavitha Cardoza on Twitter. In the chat, we've put everyone's Twitter handles and a way to contact our speakers. Please feel free to do so. As soon as this webinar closes, you'll see an evaluation survey. Please complete it. Your feedback is important and it helps us improve. Next week, September 21st at 1 p.m., we have another seminar, a webinar on the childcare workforce. Please consider joining us. Thank you so much and have a great day.